call the Honourable the Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I crave the indulgence of the Parliament to make a statement about some very significant events that have happened overnight. Madam Speaker, this is a grim day for our country and it's a grim day for our world. Malaysian Airlines MH17 has been shot down over the eastern Ukraine, it seems, by Russian-backed rebels. 295 people have been killed. At least 27 Australians have been killed. Our hearts go out to the families of all the dead. Our thoughts and prayers, especially, are with the families of the Australian dead. We can't restore them to life, but we can and will do everything to support them in this sad and bitter time, because that is the Australian way. We help in times of trouble. Madam Speaker, a Department of Foreign Affairs team is preparing to leave for Kiev. Next of kin and families will be notified as soon as possible. They'll be offered counselling and assistance, and bodies will be repatriated to Australia as quickly as possible. But, Madam Speaker, we owe it as well to the families of the dead to find out exactly what has happened and exactly who is responsible. As things stand, Madam Speaker, this looks less like an accident than a crime. I want to repeat this. As things stand, this looks less like an accident than a crime. And if so, the perpetrators must be brought to justice. So I can inform the House that as quickly as possible, Australia will be working at the United Nations Security Council for a binding resolution calling for a full and impartial investigation with full access to the site, with full access to the debris, with full access to the black box, and with full access to all individuals who might be in a position to shed light on this terrible event. And I can also inform the House that the Minister for Foreign Affairs will shortly summons the Russian ambassador to seek a categoric assurance from the ambassador that the Russian government will fully cooperate in this investigation. Yeah. Madam Speaker, we owe it to the dead and their families. We owe it to the peace and stability of the wider world to establish the facts, and we will do all we humanly can to bring that about. Let me conclude with this. The bullying of small countries by big ones, the trampling of justice and decency in the pursuit of national aggrandisement, and reckless indifference to human life should have no place in our world. Yeah.
I call the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, I rise to support the words of the Prime Minister this morning. I thank him for the conversations that we've had this morning. This news that we woke up to this morning is worse than shocking. It is debilitating, bewildering, with bewildering losses. Travelling at 6 miles height, this is unimaginable. This is a violation of the rules of civilisation. It is a tyrannical, wild act. And I appreciate that when I rang the Prime Minister this morning, he has been most forthcoming, and in a time when international events require one to put aside partisan issues, I greatly appreciate it. I acknowledge to Foreign Minister Julie Bishop and my colleague Tanya Plibersek, who have also been working on this. As the Parliament convenes right now and throughout the day, there will be anxious families having their worst fears confirmed. 3 kilometres from the town of Grabove, near the Russian-Ukrainian border, on a patch of disputed ground currently controlled by separatist terrorists, lies the scattered ruin of MH17. 298 innocent people have lost their lives in sudden, unspeakable circumstances. When I spoke to the Ukrainian chargé d'affaires in Australia, he believes a surface-to-air missile has shot down the plane. But most tragically, amongst this terrible news, there are at least 27 Australians who have been murdered. Mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, neighbours, colleagues, classmates and teammates. There are Australians who would have planned to be at the airport tomorrow night to collect friends and family. Amongst them, some of the world's leading AIDS experts. The cost of this will be felt in many parts of the world. We grieve for all of them, and it does reach beyond Australian shores. I spoke this morning with the ambassador from the Netherlands and conveyed my sympathies for her country's terrible losses. 154 Dutch nationals were on this flight, including, as I mentioned, world-renowned researchers and the former president of the International AIDS Society, Dr. Joep Lang. This flight is one of the most popular flights between Amsterdam and Melbourne and Sydney, via Kuala Lumpur. Undoubtedly, many of the Dutch nationals on this plane were coming to visit friends and possibly Australian family in Australia. In Afghanistan, Australia and the Netherlands stood united in the courage of the service of peace. Today, our countries are embraced in a shared grief. I've also spoken with the Malaysian High Commissioner, whose country is reeling from this sudden blow. It is truly a tragic day in a tragic year for Malaysia. For the people of Ukraine, this is another terrible chapter in a conflict that has already come at a most terrible human cost. In Australia, we are immune and protected from much of the conflict in the world, and for that we should be thankful. But on recent estimates, more than 500 people have already died, civilians and Ukrainian soldiers, in the conflict in the Donbass region in last weeks and months. This horrific situation can seem far removed from our daily lives, but there is no question that the conflict in this disputed part of the Ukraine has now reached Australia. The missile that brought down MH17 and the missiles that have claimed numerous other Ukrainian aircraft could not possibly be made by the people who've possibly fired them. These separatist terrorists are obtaining these instruments of murder from elsewhere. This must be investigated and it must be stopped. The Ukrainian chargé d'affaires informed me this morning that they will be inviting experts from around the world to assist with investigating this matter, and Labor most certainly supports the comments of the Prime Minister with regard to the United Nations Security Council. And Labor supports the chorus internationally calling for a full, independent, international investigation of this tragedy. Madam Speaker, this is a time for national unity. As the Prime Minister discussed with me this morning, it is a time for temperate responses, for cool heads and measured action. That is indeed the strongest possible response that Australians expect from us. But it also demands, as I believe the Prime Minister was saying, strong resolve. I say this to the Prime Minister today. Labor understands the complexity and the difficulty of the decisions that you will face. We understand that as people are working through the pain and the grief, there will be many understandable calls for all sorts of action. I say that Labor is prepared to support the government and cooperate with the Prime Minister and the government on what is the right next step to be taken in this most bewildering and shocking of events. Whether or not that involves anything to do with the G20, we say to the government, we will work with your measured approach. More generally, Madam Speaker, in relation to the situation in the Ukraine, Russia carries a significant and central responsibility in helping manage this crisis and resolving the dispute peacefully. We will support the government in vigorously pursuing and asserting this position in our position at the United Nations Security Council and in representations to the Russian government. Today, the Parliament mourns the loss of all on MH17. We pay tribute to their memory. We are conscious that there are members of our Australian community who do not yet know what has happened to people they love, and we renew our commitment to a safer, more peaceful world.
Without creating a precedent, normally we only hear from the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, but without creating a precedent this morning, I am going to give the call to the Member for Melbourne to make a short statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate it. Melbourne had been getting ready for some time for the AIDS 2014 conference, and this weekend the city was looking forward to welcoming a number of people home and also welcoming a number of distinguished international guests and researchers. Thousands of lives are going to be touched by this tragedy, and it's a reminder that any one of us in this parliament or in this country could have been on that plane. And as the member for Melbourne and on behalf of the Greens, I want to associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition.
As Speaker, I wish to associate myself with the remarks of both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, and indeed with the Greens. I am to address that conference on Monday, and I know there will be many empty spots. And I think that what we are doing is mourning with all the world and all that have been lost, and we want to see justice, but in a measured way. I would ask everybody in the chamber, both in the gallery and the chamber, to stand as a mark of respect. I thank the House and those in the gallery.
Madam Speaker.
I call the Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, the Manager of Opposition Business in the House and I have communicated this morning and agreed that the House will be suspended except for essential items of business returning from the Senate as a mark of respect to those who have lost their lives in today's tragedy.
Can I ask the Leader of the House, you did say suspension?
The same suspension as we've been doing overnight, so the House continues as it did from yesterday, so and when you return, the House is in session again. Yes, indeed. So you wish to suspend again until a later hour? Until the Minerals, Resources and Rent tax is returned from the Senate. Right. Well, I'll move that the House do now suspend, and it will be resumed at the ringing of the bells for 5 minutes. Yes, Manager of Opposition Business.
Just for the clarification of members, if I can indicate that for this suspension, it's my understanding that we're expecting transmission relatively soon, so it's important for people to remain within the building at the moment for the ringing of the bells. There will be we're expecting a longer break when we're waiting for the Qantas message, and if I can just refer to that for the information of members. I
thank the Manager of Opposition Business and perhaps repeat that. It would be good if people could stay in close proximity so that they will hear the ringing of the bells at a time when those bills are ready to be, and we receive the message from the Senate. So the House is now suspended until the ringing of the bells